Yeah, it's a really strange message. If you look at the language that he's using, parts of it are not at all surprising in terms of referring to HTS as a terrorist organization. That's not a surprise. That's something that he's been saying for a while. In fact, across the past decade or so of the Syrian conflict, he's framed opposition groups as terrorists. So that's not surprising. But what is surprising is his insistence that he was reluctant to leave. He wanted to stay and fight, which is surprising given that he left pretty quickly, let's not forget, and that he was told to leave by Russia, which evokes all kinds of questions around the sovereignty of the Assad regime, the sovereignty of Syria, if he was told by a bigger power to leave and to get out of the country. So it's a strange one. It's obviously an attempt to recycle his image. It's obviously an attempt to speak to the Alawi community in Syria and what remains of his support base. But it begs the question, what's next? I mean, it's highly unlikely that he will return to Syria, and it's highly unlikely that he'll be able to mobilize a support base in Syria. So it does feel like posturing, it does feel like a rhetorical flourish, and it's taken such a long time for it to come. It's very strange.
Yeah, strange indeed. And you just spoke about the Alawis. I'm quite interested to get your thoughts about how they would be feeling at the moment. Would they sort of fear any sort of repercussions, I suppose?
I guess that's the worry for members of the Alawi community that had garnered a lot of support from the Assad regime, both from Bashar and Hafez, his father. So there would be a concern that there would be reciprocal violence against that members of those communities. And let's not forget that Syria is a rich state full of diverse groups that have been manipulated. Divisions between those groups have been long manipulated by those in positions of power for their own ends. And so that's where the worry comes for members of the Alawi community. But if you listen to what civil society officials and representatives of HTS and other rebel groups have been saying, I guess we shouldn't call them rebel groups anymore, but what they've been saying is this is a time for all Syrians to come together. Now, I guess the question is this just, again, a rhetorical flourish, or is this actually a positive step towards an inclusive Syria that includes the Alawi community?
And do people in general in Syria feel, they are part of an inclusive nation now that the Assad regime is, has fallen, particularly those refugees who are now coming back?
So I guess it's too soon to say if it is an inclusive nation per se, but what we do know is that there is a huge amount of hope. There is a huge amount of excitement about what the future may bring and a huge amount of relief. Because let's not forget, this has been 5 decades of rule by this family, this tyrannical family, who've overseen countless massacres, who've been responsible for the murder of hundreds of thousands of people. We know that during the conflict that ran from 2011 until recently, over 500,000 people were killed. 11 million people were displaced from their homes. And we are just now discovering the horrors of Assad's prisons. So there is widespread relief that this tyrannical regime is over, and Syrians are jubilant. Questions about what happens next, of course, are on their minds. But for now, there is hope. And that's something that has been missing for so long.
Yes, Simon, of course, one of the things that might complicate things for the new administration and the commander-in-chief, Abu Muhammad al-Jolani, is Israel's plans to expand settlements in Golan Heights. How do you see this playing out?
Yeah, I mean, this is one of the many complicating factors, of course. We've seen hundreds of Israeli strikes on Syrian military targets across the past week or so, which is obviously a coordinated effort to weaken the Syrian state, whatever is left indeed of the Syrian state. And now we're seeing Benjamin Netanyahu announcing essentially an $11 million project to expand settlements into the Golan Heights. Now, the Golan Heights were occupied in 1967, annexed in 1981, and are recognized internationally as Syrian territories, largely internationally, I should say. And what we're seeing is that there are some states who've been incredibly vocal in their support of Israel, now criticizing the settlement building in the Golan Heights. And of course, Jolani, the name, refers to the Golan Heights. So there is a personal dimension to this. There's a political dimension to it. There's a legal dimension to it, and there's a geopolitical dimension to it. And it really is a precarious moment, I think, geopolitically. We've seen this, of course, in Gaza. We've seen it in Lebanon. Now we're seeing it in Syria. There are very serious questions about Israel's geopolitical aspirations here. And that has a dramatic impact on the building of a Syrian state.
Yes, and then speaking of Gaza, Simon, negotiators from a number of countries, the US, Qatar, say they are now closer to a ceasefire deal than ever before, with Hamas saying that they are more flexible with plans for Israeli troops to withdraw. So can we expect a ceasefire in the coming weeks, I suppose?
I guess there is one big X factor that may impact on this, and that's the incoming administration of Donald Trump. We know that Trump has repeatedly stated that he wants to end wars. Now, again, this is a point that I've made in lots of different contexts now, but is this just a rhetorical thing, or is he actually putting pressure on Benjamin Netanyahu to end the conflict in Gaza? We know that Hamas have said repeatedly that they are open to and willing to negotiate. Whether that's posturing or not, we don't know. But it seems to have been a number of instances where the Israelis have said this is a red line that we will not cross in negotiations. So whether Donald Trump can put pressure on the Israelis to actually agree to a final settlement, a final peace agreement in Gaza, that remains to be seen. But we've heard the story that we are closer than ever to a peace agreement, to a ceasefire, and working towards a peace deal so many times over the past year. I'll believe it when I see it.
Okay, Simon Mabon, great to get your analysis. As always, thank you very much.
Thank you.